Hello guys, it's Jonathan. Today I'm doing another Beyblade discussion. This time I'm going to ask the question, do types matter? So, this is a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. I've had a couple of ideas on how to approach it. I wanted to talk about maybe how balance types are an issue, or just kind of this weird lack of divide between stamina and defense types, but I decided let's just make a whole video on it and do that. So, I'm largely going to focus on Beyblade X for this one, since that is the relevant gen to where this would apply to, but I will still reference some older gens when I feel like it makes sense to, and I will have some sections on those as well. But that said, I will say before we get into everything, I do apologize if my voice is a bit off. I am still just kind of getting over being sick, so if I sound a little bit off, that's why. But anyways, with all that said, let's just go ahead and get started on the main topic of the video. Alright, so let's start off by going over attack types. These are probably the most consistent in all of Beyblade X, but there are some more basic attack types, things like, for example, drawn sword, pretty self-explanatory, just basic three-sided attack type. You got flat, basic attack bit. There are a couple others like this, for example, Phoenix Feather. This is more so just a prototype to Phoenix Wing, but same idea. Cobalt Drake, four-sided attacker, again, kind of a prototype to Cobalt Dragoon, so makes sense. Also, Phoenix Wing isn't really overly interesting. Three-sided attacker. It's a little faster, I guess, because of gear flop, but like, it's not that crazy. Is what it is. Also, we have Cobalt Dragoon. A bit more interesting, because it is a bit faster in left spin. And, well, it is left spin, so yeah, makes sense. Shark Edge, more chaotic as a low flat, also has the upper attack thing going on, it's shorter than normal. Drawn Buster, one-sided, well, not one-sided, but, one main contact point. Fast, but even faster on the extreme line because of, Excel. Cool. Then there's the kind of two more interesting ones here. First up is Tyranno Beat, kind of a more oblong shape. Of course, Quake as well. This is just meant to be a very, very chaotic kind of jumping around type of bay. And then, of course, we have Drawn Dagger, a barrage attacker with Rush, which is more controlled than normal, but still, moves around, and, it's a bit more chill on the extreme line to allow it to be more consistent on the extreme line. So, with all of that in mind, even though there are some differences in how these attack types are, all of them are still focused on having some, I guess, recoil, because, they do, well, attack the opponent, they are meant to hit the opponent, but also they all move around. So they all have kind of an archetype that they play into, so attack types do make sense. But in my opinion, they're the only types like this, because the other types, I think, struggle much, much more with their identity, while attack types, I think, while there are different types of attack types, there are, it's still a general archetype that, again, actually does make sense. And now we get to sort of this stamina defense problem. So we'll start with defense types. So Night Shield, this is kind of the basic defense bay, the bay that they decided to introduce, Beyblade X defense types with, and, well, it's very round, and as a needle, it's taller, okay. Needle bits, anything like this, have proven to just be consistently bad, and yeah, it just doesn't work. They get destabilized. Yeah, I don't think needle bits are overly popular. I don't think I need to go into that much further. Anyway, going further with things like Night Lance. Okay, this blade is more counter heavy. It's meant to counter attacks, and more recoil heavy. Also, in the same vein, Rhino Horn's much more compact, but it kind of does something similar where it's kind of recoil heavy. Also have high needle and spike, kind of again needle based bits, taller. Yeah, okay. Then we of course get to Sphinx Cowl. Kind of a more just bulky shape. It's less recoil heavy, but still kind of recoil heavy. It's just kind of a very generalized defense shape, I guess. And Gear Needle, well, also it's taller by a Gear Needle. So it's like a needle bit, but it has an easier time getting to the extreme line and kind of counterattacking, but with, low resistance, it doesn't, actually work that well, so, unfortunate. And our last, BX, defense type here is Black Shell, and Black Shell, it's meant to be kind of a lower down defense type. Kind of recoil heavy, but yeah, sure, it is again shorter because it's meant to be like that. And then dot. The actual sharp here, or needle, is much more subdued. It's not as sharp because, well, you need to have these smaller, kind of rough pieces on there. So with that in mind, you couldn't, go all in. So it has to be a little bit more ball-like in that sense. So it does actually make the bit quite a bit better because of that. But again, definitely a recoil-heavy blade. For our UX defense types, we have, of course, Shinobi Shadow, which is meant to be, kind of this blade that parries things. Yes, I know it's light and doesn't work well, but still, the idea is to parry things. It's very round, and yeah, just kind of shake off attacks. Cool. Metal Needle. I don't know about that one, but, less friction, so I guess better stamina, but also, yeah, I don't know what they were going with here. This wasn't a good move, but anyway. Then there's Leon Crest. Leon Crest, okay. It's a wall. It's a pretty smooth wall in a lot of ways, and the ratchet also pairs with that. Also a bit shorter. That's interesting, but yeah, it's just a wall. Yeah. Just meant to tank hits. We'll come back to that idea later. Anyway, Gear Needle are top of this one, so let's go and move on to the stamina types. So first up here we have Wizard Arrow. Kind of a round shape, meant to be, good for stamina, but yeah, just overall pretty round. You have a ball, which technically a ball moves more than a needle. However, with Beyblade X, sitting in the middle of the stadium is a bit more of a detriment to stamina types because, well, they're meant to, lose to attack types, and because of that, I mean, you don't want to be sitting right where attack types are going to hit, so having a bit more movement makes sense, whereas, for defense types, being able to stay planted in the middle to deflect attacks, sure, okay, that idea makes sense. But when you look at the actual part breakdown, we get some problems. So again, ball, because ball and needle both are just meant to be, better stamina. Okay, sure. They have better stamina than flat. Okay. Individually, their stamina, I mean, usually, things like ball are preferable, but because needle just gets destabilized too easily, but they have a somewhat similar idea in a sense. We'll come back to this anyway. These are also taller bays usually, so moving on. Anyway, Viper Tail. This bay, whole thing is like drain spin or whatever, and yeah, it's kind of recoil heavy. Also used, things like Night Lance. At one point was used in some attack combinations because of, recoil. Taller or, again, just a smaller ball, sure. And our last BX, stamina bay. Here's Wyvern Gale. Okay, it's meant to be round. Has airflow for better stamina. Also Gear Ball. Gear Ball, with how the gear is, it's meant to kind of get to the extreme line easier for counterattacks, but again, this doesn't work very well because, low resistance, so, yeah. And then we get to the UX ones. We have Phoenix Rudder. This bay kind of has, a decent shape, pretty round, has a couple points that are a little bit better for attacking, some recoil, but also has a shape that's under, different airflow, well, better airflow for stamina, just good stamina in general with the shape. But again, you can counterattack a little bit, and, 970, mid-height, so not as tall, but also glide, has POM, and the ball is meant to just be very good for stamina, but also has the extra gears on the bit, so it can have a better counterattack on it, which, again, isn't great if you actually get to that, because, well, the bit has lower resistance. And lastly, our last UX bay and also stamina bay. Wizard Rod. Now 570, it's a mid-height, but disc ball is taller than normal, so that makes sense. And also a disc ball, so to kind of help keep the bay up. Whether or not this works is questionable for sure, but it is what it is. Aside from that, it's just kind of a similar, to ball. But Wizard Rod, it's meant to be a very large blade and round, outer weight distribution, good for stamina, but also this blade is heavy. It's very tanky. So he's round and tanky and good at walling things out. I think you could immediately say that there's a lot of problems and parallels between these two types. I'm not saying stamina and defense types are the exact same. They obviously have differences, but the problem is that they're too similar. This has been a consistent issue with Beyblade. Stamina and defense types are too similar. I think that, yes, there's differences, okay, stamina types are usually meant to be more round, but, well, that's not always the case. And sometimes defense types are more recoil heavy. Not always the case, though. I mean, we've also seen bays that, try to have counterattack moves, which Again, yeah, they both try this thing with low resistance. It doesn't work well. Yes, there are things like, okay, airflow, to try and promote better stamina, or things like even, glide. Okay, that's more stamina specific, or defense types being just a bit more, bulky. Okay, sure. Like even Leon Crest, represents that. So there are differences for sure, but they're too similar of ideas, and I feel like it's easy to get them kind of mixed up, especially with something like Wizard Rod, where yeah, it's stamina oriented, but it's also very tanky. It's something that just happens, and I think these types get a little bit too close together, to the point where yeah, I don't think it really works very well. I think just not having a distinction could lead to some more interesting ideas, and we'll talk about this more later. So I don't think types are exactly a great thing, but yeah, hopefully this at least helps to prove somewhat of a point that yeah, stamina defense types are maybe a little bit, too similar in some ways. And now it's time to talk about balance types. I'm just going to say this right now. Balance types aren't real. That might be quite a statement to make, but let me explain. So first up, let's get to the first balance type Beyblade X, alright? Hellscythe. Okay. So, the Blade of Hellscythe is something that was meant to be, kind of a jack of all trades. It has some, thickness to it, okay. It could be a little bit tanky. It's fairly round, so that's good stamina, but also you have these like attack points here, okay, it's attack. But ultimately, it was just used for stamina until Wizard Art came out, because that's just better. But also, that's the problem with balance types, is that even if they have a good niche, a lot of times they get uprooted by something that just works into that niche better. Being a jack of all trades, a lot of times just isn't great. I'm not saying it can't work, but again, there's other ways to kind of explain these jack of all trades type of, parts, which I'll get to. But yeah, this one, it was more stamina oriented, but just kind of falls off because, well, yeah, I mean, it's not quite round enough or heavy enough, which, I mean, weight's one thing, but yeah. I think the shape of Wizard Run is also just better, so anyway. Ratchets are kind of a variable, usually shorter, kind of more attack-oriented in that regard. I won't really go over ratchets for anything else because I don't think it's really worthwhile. They're all close enough anyway. Yeah, anyway. So, bits though, these are important. Taper. What is taper? It's an attack bit. Yes, it is much more, controlled, and it's slower, has better stamina for sure. But ultimately, it's an attack bit. It's kind of similar to Rush in that regard. In a lot of ways. It's all there is to it. Then we also have things like, Hell's Chain. Okay, Hell's Chain. Similar idea. Kind of just a balanced shape. Kind of has different heights I could hit at, but again, I feel like that's more attack-oriented. Yes, it has better stamina and defense. Yes, you could argue that is a balance, but you don't need a whole type for this kind of weird niche, I feel. I feel like stats are a better alternative, and we will get to stats later, but I just don't think that this is the best way to go about it. And again, high taper, it's just taper, but taller. Yeah, that's attack. Anyway. Leon Claw. Leon Claw is a weird one. This is like the closest we actually get to being what would be considered a proper balance type. The sides are kind of thick, wall-like sides. Okay, cool. Defensive, right? And then we have the upper part here, which is meant to be kind of wavy. It's meant to be more attack-like. So, okay, it is a mix of them, right? It kind of does both. It has kind of a somewhat rounder shape, but it still can attack, has some recoil, and, oh, wait a minute. That's kind of like what this guy does, isn't it? In some ways. So, even though, yes, it has a mix of types, that doesn't really matter, in a sense. You would still assign it to something else. Or again, we could just not do types, which I'll get to, but yeah. Point, this one has a ball in the center, it can counterattack, so again, in some ways you could say, oh, well that's balance, but again, having a ball in the center that allows you to counterattack, anyway. Yeah, it doesn't work entirely, and yes, I know this is more balance-oriented, because yes, this is a much smaller ball, this is a much bigger ridge, I get it, but I don't think that this really matters a whole lot. Again, I just don't think types are overly necessary. There's also, Unicorns thing. I mean, yeah, it has different sides. It's like a, more attack-oriented side. This is more, stem-oriented, but it's still smooth enough. It's It's more just stamina. Gear point, it's the same deal as point, just, you know, a little bit better for the extreme line, I guess, sure. And then we have Weiss Tiger. This is just straight up an attack type. Yeah, sure, you could say it has better stamina and defense or whatever, but it's a bulkier attack type in that sense. Cool. Unite, it just kind of is a weird mix of like point and taper. Again, I guess you can argue balance, but this isn't the first mold. This is just straight up an attack bit. I'm just saying. The second mold, I guess you could say, is more like closer to being what true balance is or whatever, but whatever. There's just so few parts that really fit into that description. Maybe, you know, the second mold of Unite, maybe Hell's Chain, but aside from them, like everything else you could pretty easily assign to something else, and even those you probably could. But I don't like the idea of assigning anything to, well, anything, yeah. I just don't think balance in particular, though, is a type that should exist in a lot of ways. I don't like the idea of it. Because again, most parts end up being either just jack of all trade parts that don't really do anything in particular, or if they do anything in particular, they're overshadowed by something else. That's usually how it goes. Or, you know, they fill a niche that, like Taper, for example. Okay, it's attack-oriented, but because it's, you know, meant to be balanced, it has better stamina. Okay, well, it's more controlled in that sense as well. Cool. That works as a good attack bit. Great. Yeah, I don't really think balance works as a concept, to be honest. Alright, let's talk about actual, you know, other gens a little bit here. So I can say, well, I can't say much about Bakugan Shoot. I'm just not as familiar with Bakugan Shoot, so if types actually were more distinct there, let me know, I guess. But yeah, it's not something I can really accurately comment on, so... Metal Fight and Burst, so I can talk all about those. So Metal Fight, most bays were kind of put into, well, with, you know, bottoms, they had, you know, 4 different main types, kind of like how X is in a sense. But yeah, there was a flat, ball, defense, and sharp. Flat was for attack, sharp was for stamina. Defense, well, it was kind of for defense, but I feel like then you got things like wide defense or semi-defense, which were more just balance, and then there's ball, which ended up kind of being for defense, and yeah, sure. Because of how metal wheels were, I feel like a lot of metal wheels would be for one thing and then get used for another. Yeah, it was, yeah. Anyway, yeah, types definitely got a little bit blurred there, and there's also things like Very Aries, which is a defense type, but then Delta Drive could use attack, stamina, or defense, but, you know, I guess because the wheel was more defensive, they made it defense, but doesn't entirely work, I feel. And then Zero G, they actually just straight up swapped, like, what the ideas of stamina and defense types were. If you could just swap types like that, like, the concepts behind them, I feel like maybe there isn't enough distinction between those two types, as I've already talked about. For Burst, yeah, this one's weird. I feel like stamina and defense types just kind of ended up feeling like hybrids. Like, okay, Cyclone Ragnarok, like, I'm going to talk about DB especially, but, like, Cyclone Ragnarok was, a stamina type, I guess. That works. But also kind of low to the ground and heavy, so, well, somewhat heavy, I guess, with a Giga. Early on, at least, it was heavy, but, I mean, kind of defensive a little bit, but then you have things like Vanish Fafnir. That thing is a wall, or at least was at the time. So again, stamina type, but pretty defensive. Wind Knight, I feel like, was also a decent hybrid of stamina and defense. And then you have, no joke, Savior Perseus. This thing was a stamina type, because it had Bearing Dash. Savior is an attack part, but they just call it stamina because the driver stamina. Yeah, Burst actually decided types based on drivers. If we're deciding the entire type of a bay based on one part, I think they're considered pretty arbitrary. And things like attack, yeah, they always made sense, you know, in Burst, I feel. Attack was attack. Sure. Okay, what about, you know, defense? Okay, well, there's things like, you know, Chain Curvius. Okay, well, that one's pretty bulky. It's defense-like, has solid stamina, because, you know, Yard Dash was decent, but, you know... well, at least there was stamina, but yeah. You know, things like Roar Bahamut. Okay, it's defense-like, but its whole gimmick is becoming rounder, which can give it better stamina, but, you know, it's a defense type. Okay, Prominence Phoenix, it's very round, but hey, it has movement because of, you know, Metal Universe, so... it's basically a defense type, but yeah, I feel like the whole line between stamina and defense was just too close a lot of the time. I guess defense maybe made out a little bit better, but stamina was, like, really close. Also, there were just, like, less stamina types by the end of Burst. It was kind of bad. I actually think balance types made out the best in Burst because there's a lot of mode changes. So balance types basically always had mode changes. Sure, that works. It's like the only way balance works. But when Beyblade X exists, I mean, I don't think we're getting mode changes based on our current part selection. If we do, sure, but if not, then like balance just can't really function as a type, I feel. Um, yeah, again, I feel like there's always been some arbitrary stuff with types, and again, I think Beyblade X has it. Might be the worst, honestly, so far, because again, I just don't think balance types work inherently without mode changes. Maybe we get them, maybe we don't, and then again, stamina defense I feel like are just way too close together. Even in Metal Fight, I think there's a little bit more divide here. There just kind of isn't. I mean, there is still, but it's too close. Yeah, I don't know. Especially with something like Burst, where it's just like, okay, we're going to decide the parts based on drivers, and if you're deciding on one part, come on. Yeah, I don't think old gens really get away with this either, but I think X was just kind of a bigger problem for me, so I wanted to, talk about it now. But this is an idea I want to talk about actually kind of after Burst, before X, so I've had this idea for a while, so I was going to talk about it regardless, but yeah, I think X is definitely strengthened my want to talk about this topic for sure. So with everything in mind, do types matter? No, they are arbitrary. However, should bays just not have any indication of what they do? Of course not. I think that there should be a stat pentagon. We've seen ideas like this before, but I think having actual stats that make sense would be huge. I think you could also do these by part, for example, maybe have different stats per each part. But I think, yeah, there should be a stat for, well, just a stat pentagon for the entire bay. So what should these stats be? I'm going to use Drawn Sword here as an example. I will say for ratchets, I'm going to kind of leave these out of it to some extent. I don't think these are overly impactful, but yeah, for bits and blades, I think this is a pretty big part. So we'll just go over the whole combo, okay? So what is the first stat? Speed. How much does the bay move around? I think that's important to know, because you could also have parts like Taper that are, slower, but they still move around. I think these should also all go up to 5, so a 1 out of 5 would be something like Needle, it's just stationary. A 2 could be something that maybe doesn't move a whole lot, but maybe moves a little bit, or can have the potential to move, maybe like Point. A 3 would be something that gets some movement, but not as much, maybe like a Metal Flat or Taper. 4, kind of a basic flat, and then 5 would be like a rubber flat or something. So Drawn Sword here would have a 4 in speed because it has a flat. The next stat is friction. How well does the bay actually stick to the stadium? This can also play into speed, but again, there are different factors. Things like POM would probably be like a 1, or metal would be like a 2. Plastic would be a 3. Things like dot that have some extra friction to it would be a 4, and then of course rubber would be a 5, because again, it sticks to the stadium the best. I think having kind of an idea of how well a bay can actually stay on the stadium is helpful to have, especially when you expand outwards to like rubber parts that aren't just rubber flats. So, or again, having like metal or POM parts, I think it is worth considering. So Drawn Sword here would be a 3. Third, power. How strong is the bay? How much force can it give? Okay, so a round bay would be like a 1. A bay with some ridges would be a 2. A bay with, decent power, but nothing crazy, would be a 3. And then, a more attack-oriented bay, kind of what we know as an attack type, would be a 4, like an average one. And then bays with kind of insane attack points would be a 5. So Drawn Sword here would probably be a 4, of course having some decent contact points on it, right? Fourth, stamina. How much stamina does a bay have? A 1 means that it just dies instantly. A 3 means that it's not really that great for stamina, but it's not completely hopeless. A 3 gives it, a decent bit of stamina, like Taper, for example. Kind of a hybrid type of bait in that sense, to where, yes, it can still maybe move around or do some stuff, but it still has, lower stamina, but maybe better than some other baits that move around a lot. But also things like, a rubber ball, for example. That would be high friction, but, you have less stamina because of it. A 4 is just kind of a typical, ball or something. And then a 5 would be like, POM or like free spinning or something, right? So Drawn Sword here would have a 2 for stamina, because again it has a flat, so it's not great for it, but not completely horrible. And the last stat is weight. I think knowing the weight of a part, or just bay, is important to know kind of what it can do and how it functions. So 1, that's like remake light. 2 is like unusually light, like Shinobi Shadow. 3, just kind of a, normal-ish weight, whatever. And then a 4 means that this bay, it's heavier, nothing crazy, but heavier overall. And then a 5 means that this bay is quite heavy. And of course, these would all be relative to the time period, so maybe have like a seasonal reset or something of these. But still, for Beyblade X as we know it, in that sense, I'd say Drawn Sword's like a 4 overall. It's still decently heavy, but nothing like crazy, like, like not Drawn Buster. Well, I guess kind of Drawn Buster, but, things like, Cobalt Drake or Phoenix Wing, So with our stat Pentagon, we would then have, of course, 4 speed, 4 power, 4 weight, 3 friction, 2 stamina. That would be our stat Pentagon for this thing, and that means we don't really need a type. We kind of know what the bay does. This gives us a much better description, but also can allow for more experimentation of weirder bays that don't have to follow the ideas of types. You can just make them based on what you want. You can maybe have this crazy high friction, high weight bay that maybe, lacks power and stamina and weight, but again, it's meant to just be super high friction. That could be interesting. I mean, yeah, there's different ways you could make these within types, but I think that this just allows for more diversity, but also just means that you don't have to stick to these stupid ideas of what a type is. Like how, every defense type has to have like this kind of a needle-based part. We don't need to do that. We can have other parts. Do crazier things, have defense like blades with other, parts. I think that would be great. So it would be really nice to have a stat Pentagon or any kind of stat thing. You don't have to do these stats exactly. This is just my example, but I think it would work really, really well to have something like this, and would just be a huge, huge help to Beyblade as a whole. So yeah, with everything said, that's kind of my proposal, and with all that in mind, should a stat Pentagon actually replace the type system? Yes. However, I'm not opposed to keeping types. I know that, yes, I just went on this whole thing about keeping types, it's stupid, but like at the same time, will Taka or Tomy realistically do this? No. But I think, if they could just ignore types and kind of assign it after the fact, after they've looked at all the stats, then I think it's better. I know that stats already do kind of exist, but I think really trying to lean more into that is the main focus of a bay. And then types would just kind of be an afterthought. I think that's more sensible. That way we get a better look at what these bays actually can do. And also stop constricting bays to be specific things for specific types. We don't need every defense type to have a needle. Not every stamp type needs to have a ball. I think focusing more on the, the stats of the bay, and if we have to assign a type, do it after that, or just do away with types entirely. But yeah, I think having stats be the main focus would be the best thing, because I just don't think types matter enough for them to kind of be this big idea that they are, so... Well said, yeah, I guess let me know what you think about that. I know stats are already a factor, but, make them more of a factor, I would say, and, reduce the role of a type. But with all that said, thanks for watching, and bye-bye.